So, an important and perhaps controversial judgment from the Supreme Court today, which has held that the noted activist and lawyer Prashant Bhushan, they found him guilty of committing criminal contempt of court for two recent tweets. Now, what are these tweets? On 29th June, he had posted a photo of the current Chief Justice of India, Sharad Arvind Bobde, where he's seated on a Harley Davidson superbike. And he's in the tweet, Bhushan writes that he says that he's commenting the fact that the CJI is sitting on a bike without a mask or a helmet on a bike which belongs to a BJP leader's son at a time when the Supreme Court, because it's in lockdown mode, is not quite providing the fundamental right to access to justice for people in this country. The second tweet, in fact, which came earlier, was the one on 27th June, where he wrote, and I quote, "When historians in the future look back at the last 6 years to see how democracy has been destroyed in India, even without a formal emergency, they will particularly mark the role of the Supreme Court in this destruction, and more particularly the role of the last 4 Chief Justices of India." So that's what he wrote in these 2 tweets. Obviously pretty strong stuff. The court didn't really like it. Initially there was a petition filed about the CJI Bobde, the superbike photo tweet by an advocate from Madhya Pradesh, which the courts then took up as a suo moto thing and then added the other tweet into it. Now, what the courts have said today about these tweets is this. They've said, that this, and I quote here again, "The scurrilous allegations, which are malicious in nature and have the tendency to scandalize the court, are not expected from a person who is a lawyer of 30 years standing. In our considered view, it cannot be said that the above tweets can be said to be a fair criticism of the functioning of the judiciary made bona fide in the public interest." Now, this was obviously very important because Bhushan defended his tweets by saying, look, what I said here is bona fide criticism. It's a public institution. Judges are public functionaries. I am raising this. In fact, it's not only important for us to be able to raise criticism because judges are not immune from it, but it's a duty of all citizens to do so if we want to ensure that democracy doesn't die, if we see something going wrong. Now, the key there obviously is that the criticism has to then be bona fide. It has to be in good faith. It has to have some basis. And Bhushan sought to argue that by providing a very detailed 142-page affidavit where he set out his reasons for this, whether it was the anguish over the lack of access to the courts during the lockdown for the superbike tweet, and of course the way he believes the court has been failing to do its constitutional duties in the last few years, ever since the BJP came to power in 2014. Now, for that second part, he actually provided a huge detail of all the controversies in the court during the tenures of the last 4 CJI. So that's J.S. Kher, Deepak Mishra, Ranjan Gogoi, and currently S.A. Bobde. His lawyer Dushyant Dave made some very valiant arguments in the court, very spirited defense where he argued about what was happening and said that this was, he listed several of these examples, including the sexual harassment allegations against CJ Ranjan Gogoi and how those were handled, and the fact that he then later got a nomination to the Rajya Sabha, and said that, look, there are good reasons for someone to raise criticisms of the Supreme Court at this time. Now, the court heard all those arguments, but in their judgment, they've rejected these on 2 sorts of grounds. So when it came to the CJI Bobde tweet about him on the superbike and the court being in lockdown, they pointed out that, look, actually the court was on that at that very moment, at the time the photo was taken, they were on vacations. Otherwise, actually, also, if you look at the court was functioning. It had even heard cases whether by Bhushan or where Bhushan himself was a litigant. So, for instance, where he'd asked for a stay on an FIR which had been filed against him in Gujarat. So obviously, this was a false tweet. So the 29th June statement is malicious, they said. The second one about the court, playing a role in the destruction of democracy, this they came down very hard and very strongly on, because they said that this undermines people's faith in the judiciary. It takes away people's confidence in the courts. So if we look at some of the specific things which they said there, they said that it undermines the dignity and authority of the institution of the Supreme Court of India and the CJI, and directly affronts the majesty of law. Now, what they said is the problem is that if you let something like this happen, not only do the public lose faith in the judiciary, which is supposed to be such an important part of our democracy, which is the core and central to Indian democracy, Indian constitutional democracy and the rule of law, it also makes it tough for judges to do their jobs because they feel they're not being protected from malicious attacks. So they said when this kind of thing happens, the court has to be firm, even though it may seem like the better thing to do is to be magnanimous and do nothing. they have to take a firm stance. They have to, not let this go, because this can otherwise lead to very, very serious problems for the institution of the judiciary as a whole. Now, on this basis, they found that Bhushan was guilty of criminal contempt. They've not specified a punishment. That will be decided on 20th August after hearing arguments from Bhushan on sentencing as well. Now, the maximum punishment under the Contempt of Courts Act is 6 months imprisonment, and you can have a fine as well. But the Supreme Court is not bound by that. That's for other courts. The Supreme Court has its own jurisdiction and powers when it comes to contempt. So they could even give a longer sentence. They could give very high fines. They could even take action like stripping him of his status as an advocate. These are things which they could possibly look at doing in this case. That's something which we'll have to see on 20th August. The big picture thing to take away from this is that, look, this was an important decision. The court has given its reasons. There is already very strong disagreement with it. The key question is this a dangerous issue for freedom of speech? Because at some level, the court doesn't really engage with all the arguments which Bhushan gave for why he had a bona fide opinion that the court had played a role in destruction of democracy. They don't really deal with the specifics of that argument. And if that's the case, the courts are going to say that we're not going to look at that, and we're still going to say that what you've said is in bad faith, what you've said is dangerous for the judiciary, and therefore you're committing contempt. There's potentially a very, very big issue here with whether we will be able to criticize the judiciary strongly and for actions which they undertake, even if we are sort of justifying it with reasons. So obviously stay tuned with the Quint for the updates on the sentencing and obviously what else keeps happening in this realm of free speech and fundamental rights.